September 11th, 1995. Court orders government to obey law. In 1989, Congress and the Bush administration did something that was unbelievably stupid, even for government, which can easily outstupid anyone. They passed the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, FIRREA. The politicians rushed into FIRREA in order to get the S&L crisis behind us. But the legislation had so many idiotic provisions that the crisis mushroomed into a $120 billion taxpayer bailout. Among the ill-considered and destructive provisions of this act was one abrogating the government's contracts with healthy S&Ls that had agreed to take over the insolvent thrifts. By turning sound business decisions into unsound ones, this provision endangered the healthy thrifts that had agreed to acquire failing ones. Even more stupidly, it assumed that government is above the law and not bound by its contracts. That President Bush and a majority of Congress would make such an assumption shows just how lawless government's become. For 6 years, at the expense of S&L share owners and ultimately taxpayers, the government has got away with this lawless abrogation of its contracts. But on August 30th, a federal appeals court ruled that the government cannot renege on its contractual obligations and is liable for breach of contract where its legislation is directed at repudiating prior contractual agreements. The good news is that a high court has ruled 9-2 that the federal government must obey the law. The bad news is that in a democracy, the taxpayers are the government, and we will be stuck for the approximately $20 billion in damages that the government will have to pay. The most outrageous aspect of the whole affair is that government gave no thought to actions that destroyed the careers and fortunes of S&L owners and necessitated a taxpayer bailout of deposit insurance. FIRREA is a first-class example of the government's inability to do anything right or to even understand what it's doing. In the 20th century, an insane ideology grew up that government was the source of good in society. Intellectuals presented government as a savant full of goodwill that corrected social wrongs and served the public interest. This view allowed the government a greatly expanded role, and now, after many decades, the evidence is in. Everything the government has touched is worse than ever. Every program has done far more harm than good. It remains to be seen whether democracy is strong enough to cut government back down to a size where it can do less harm. Patriotism cannot survive in a country where government is the biggest burden in people's lives. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury.